What follows is a short story, or novelette, written in character by Remy Kogan. It comes from another work-in-progress novel of mine, the story of which has been fully fleshed out and was conceptualised in 2019-2020. It will be released at some point in the future, and this in-world novelette will be referenced in it, and maybe even included in some editions. I thought it apt to release this short story early and now, given the current state of human development as of May-September 2023. I thought the subject matter of this story would take longer to come to fruition. Apparently not. It's happening now. The Girl from Sinsay by Remy Kogan. Part 1.
My name is Elmfane Terrin. The story I am to tell you happened to me several months ago. I'm still alone. I am an explorer, a prospector. I hope I still am. Non-contractually, I offer my exploring and prospecting services, weekdays, to the Sreaswin Company, based in the town of Prospectors Rest, North Cape Dominusa. However, due to recent events, I'm taking a short break. Friday, last day of my working week. It was early morning, and I had made my way from my home at Sycopraxia Cove to my base of employment. Prospectors Rest is only a small town, resting south of the north-bordering Methane Ridge. Plastered on hitching posts, the door to the general store and the village notice board, were bounty posters. All of them offered gold reward for the capture, dead or alive, of the elusive Evade Elanti. They were wanted throughout the whole of Sinsay, let alone Cape Dominusa. Everyone had heard stories. This evading vigilante could supposedly fly, teleport themselves and others, traverse through time, pass through walls and objects like a ghost, and apparently could remove and create people and objects at will. I believed these magical powers to be only what they were, rumours. I gave no credence to them. I made my way inside the fire-lit warmth of the Ludamundi Arms to escape the snow and numbing cold. Even though I and my other co-workers that had gathered in the establishment were dressed head to toe in furs and leathers, the abnormally strong winter was definitely making itself known. I made my way over to the table, where Mr. Sreaswin was strategically analysing a map of the region. The other prospectors, including my neighbour from Sycopraxia, Grainy Horsey, were gathered around him, listening to his plan. I met Grainy whilst working for Sreaswin, many years ago. He moved to Sycopraxia after he learned I lived there. I called him my friend, as he was, and I did know he had hidden deeper feelings for me.
Elmfane, nice of you to join us, lass.
Foreman Sreaswen said, which caused all the men to look over at me. I was the only lass who offered their skills to his company, and I'm very sure he believed I was inadequate to do a man's job. Prospecting, though, for ore veins and exploring uncharted land is my lifelong passion. Discovery and exploration.
Right, lads. And lass. Locations A, B and C. Team A will consist of...
Sreaswen divided us up. I was placed into Team B, along with Grainy, and a pair of men. I believe their names were Elgoyan and Davidson, or names similar to those. Snowstorm Pass had become completely impassable due to the strong and abnormal chaos that the winter was inflicting upon the ridge. The northern land of Methane was cut off. It was our task to head into the ridge and try to find another passage through. If we thought it was cold and blustery on flat land, the conditions in the ridge were unspeakable. Our B team circumvented west of Sparksaber Mount, the tallest mountain in the range. I knew, as I'm sure the others in my party did, that it was increasingly unlikely that we would find passage. The conditions were grossly vexatious. We could not see where we walked, for covering our faces with fur, to stop frostbite. The wind and piercing snow jostled us around, with no set direction or rhythm. It was quite evident that the world did not want us to be there. I misplaced my left foot and slid down the mountainside, caught in a small avalanche. Thankfully, it was only a few metres. I suffered no major injury. Unthankfully, however, where I did come to rest, seemed to be both inaccessible and inescapable, without sufficient aid. I was shaken, and the reality of what had happened in all the chaos only hit me after the event was over. The team neither noticed my peril nor my absence. I looked around where I had fallen from to see if they had or not. I was about to shout Graney's name, as loud as my lungs would allow me to do, given the harsh conditions surrounding me. However, a fearful sight caused me to think twice. A mountain bear. It was off in the distance, pounding its paws into the ground, maybe looking for some food in the inhospitable conditions. I wondered that maybe it was trapped also in this pocket of the mountain I found myself. I believed that if I had grabbed its attention, it would have grabbed its food. I stood still, and slowly, without too much crunch of the snow underfoot, took precious steps backwards. It was in that moment, inexplicably, the falling snow and frosty air suddenly cleared. Instantaneously and mysteriously, the sky became clear, a bright blue hue in the morning sun. No clouds or remnants of precipitation. Visibility had increased noticeably. I could see the bear more clearly, and knew that if it decided to turn, so it too would see more clearly of me. I looked over my shoulder as I backed away, and up to where I had fallen from, to see if any of my party had become aware of my absence. Keeping my eyes on the beast as my distance with it increased, my gladfulness ended quickly. A shout foolishly came from a man whom I presume had not seen my threat.
Elmfane!
It was Graney, and he caught my attention.
She's here, fellows.
The bear became spooked, and the first thing it noticed was me, standing now a fair distance away. The distance I had garnered, though, was now all in vain. I didn't need the biting cold to keep me frozen in place. You idiot, I thought, in reference to my shouty friend. The beast charged at me at full pelt. I had nowhere to go. Behind me and to my right were the sheer sides of the mountain. To my left was a sheer drop down the mountain. To my front was the bear. I involuntarily cowered, wrapped into a ball, and awaited my impending doom. The snarling and visceral sounds, however, being produced by the beast, stopped. The moment of its attack didn't arrive. I stuck my head up out of my wrapped body and gazed upon the bear, frozen still. Not frozen in a temperature sense, but rather in a time sense. It was suspended. Confused, I looked back at Graney, up on the higher ground. His head was turned left, and his eyes were closed. His posture suggested to me that he didn't want to witness my demise. He too, though, was frozen in time. Wonderment filled me. I wasn't scared, just confused, a feeling of joy at the prospect of my life being spared. The bear, still, was close enough to me to be inspected. Pure curiosity took over. My feet left no prints in the snow as I walked over to the gaping mouth of the beast. I saw its pink-red throat and the darkness that was the entry to its gullet. I saw its rough, irregularly chipped teeth that were dotted with discoloration. I gazed into its watery eyes, which had reacted to the cold. As I inspected it in awe, it vanished instantaneously from right in front of me. Behind where the creature once stood was another woman-shaped one in the distance. The slender figure, dressed in black furs and leathers, was seemingly moving with my pace of time.
The girl saw me and tripped backwards. I guess she was startled by my sudden appearance after I'd removed the bear. Finally, after many times trying, I had saved her. I was getting bored that it kept killing you, so I cheated, I said to this out-of-place villager. She looked at me with wide eyes and amazement. After a short while of silence, I continued with a sarcastic tone of voice. You're welcome? I was thinking of resuming time and being on my way. After all, the challenge that I'd set myself was technically complete. The girl, though, finally spoke to me.
You're the Evade Elanti.
I thought I'd amuse her and play along. I cleared my throat and got myself into a somewhat heroic stance. Why, yes, that's what the people of this world call me. And you are?
Elmfane Terrin,
the helpless girl responded. At the time I had misheard her. I gave her a smile, trying to be nice. It's nice to meet you, Elfie Terrin, I said. Are you stuck?
I fell down here. Me and my team. up on the higher ground. We're exploring the ridge to find passage into Methane.
She explained. As I knew the truth, I decided to give her some advice. I would tell you guys not to bother. It's impossible to get into Methane until this winter clears.
This winter has been going on for so long.
Her words threw me. I stood in silence for a moment as I pondered the notion that she had some concept of how long the winter had actually been going on. It has, I finally said.
You saved my life, Evade L&T. How can I repay you?
She asked. That's not necessary, Elfie Turn, I said with a slight chuckle. Then she did another thing that threw me for a loop. She asked me a question I was not expecting someone like her to ask.
What did you mean, though, by "it kept killing me"?
I stood, shocked. I was speechless. I needed time to think about what that question from her meant. What it suggested and implied about who she was. Where do you live? Where's your home? I said rather fast. It was the only thing I could think to say as my mind raced with questions about her.
Terran's Cabin, West Walk, Sycopraxia Cove.
She told me.
It's been my family's home for many
Part 2.
I woke up immediately in my bed, at home. The sun streamed in through my window with its rise. In a single moment, I was in peril up on the mountain, talking to the Evade L&T. The next, I was waking up in my own bed. Now I was so very confused, and ever so slightly feeling groggily depressed. Did I dream all of it? Did Evade L&T bring me here? What day or time is it? How long have I been sleeping? What is happening? Racing thoughts. My clothes were different too. Not the attire suitable for a ferociously blustery mountain, but rather my nightgown. I left my house and proceeded outside onto the boardwalk. The picturesque sight of the cove was a welcome one, in contrast to the previous snow flurries and terrible conditions, if it did indeed all happen. Still mightily confused, I knocked on the old wooden door of Graney's cabin. Thinking if what had happened was not a dream, surely he would have checked up on me. Or would he have? How long has it been? Has it been? As soon as he opened the door, his eyes widened so large I thought they'd never stop. He immediately latched onto me, with a tight, rib-crushing hug.
Where in the world have you been?
He screamed, his voice breaking. Where have I been?
You've been gone for days. What happened to you? You vanished up on the mountain. That bear along with you.
He rambled. The grip in his hug didn't ease, and it was getting a little uncomfortable and awkward. I'm okay, just confused, I said as I patted him on the back to break the embrace. He didn't, though, get the hint.
All of us are confused, Elmfane. My gracious.
I stood inactive, uncomfortable, as he hugged me. He hadn't seen me in so long, though, possibly, that I resigned and let him take as much time as he needed. As the awkward embrace continued, something at the foot of my cabin's door caught my eye. Nothing. I had the strong urge to gaze at the entrance to my own abode, however, thinking someone, or something, was standing there. From what I could see, though, all it was empty space. After he had calmed from the shock at seeing me alive, Graney and I stood at the wooden railings of West Walk and talked, looking out over the waters of the cove. The cabins in the distance produced smoke out their chimneys, from the villagers in them making breakfast. I tried my best to explain succinctly to my friend what had happened. I met the Evade L&T, and she saved my life. Graney turned to me, awestruck.
You met the elusive magical evader?
I shrugged as I looked out over the still waters. Whoever it was that stopped me being mauled, that brought me here. They identified with that name, Evade L&T. I could sense a franticness building within Graney as he struggled to begin his sentence.
But what caused it to happen? The other guys blamed me, Elgirian, Davidson.
Again, I believe those were their names.
They blame me for your disappearance. I told Mr. Sreeswin and the others that you simply vanished as that bear launched its attack. We searched the area all weekend. We all presumed you had passed, buried under the snow of the avalanche. Some presumed that I saw incorrectly due to altitude sickness, you standing upon the lower ground, and even alluded to the possibility that I was just lying, that I purposely disposed of you. All the guys ridiculed me about the magical, devouring, disappearing bear.
I turned to him with a slight, sympathetic smile.
There were no lights from your cabin,
he continued.
I've been knocking, waiting for the past few days. No answer. I've missed you so much, Elmfane.
I felt the anguish of my friend and sympathised with him. I placed my hand on his left shoulder in comfort. I can only tell you, literally, what happened. I don't know the whys or the hows. He took my hand, held and slightly caressed it. It was again slightly awkward. I allowed it, however, given his heightened emotional state.
What is important is that you're safe,
he said, seemingly trying to hold back tears.
We need to tell the others at Prospector's Rest, though, that you are...
I looked out over the cove once more. I need some time to understand what has happened. I will tell them, obviously, in due course.
I'll tell them today,
he blurted out.
I won't mention anything, though, about the Evade Elan tea. I'll think of a tale to tell as I go on my way.
He was rather enthusiastic. You're going up there today? I asked, still not knowing if it was or wasn't a weekday.
It's Tuesday, my dear,
he said with a smile.
I'll let everyone know there that you're safe, but just need some time to recover from a confusing ordeal.
I slightly laughed with a scoff and nodded, obviously. My confusion was a given. They're going to want to see me in person, I pointed out. Just your word alone won't cut it.
You're not going today, though. You're resting today. I'm just so glad you are safe, Elmfane.
With his words, Grainy hugged me once more. I patted him on the back. You're a kind friend, Grainy Horsey. He broke away and smiled gently at me. As I've already said, I knew he had deeper feelings for me.
I must go,
he declared, before turning to head out of the cove and travel north to Prospector's Rest. Before he got close to the steps, however, he turned around once more, with a sly look upon his face. I almost didn't catch his gaze, as I had resumed my observing of the water. The little laugh of his, though, garnered my attention.
Before I do tell roughly what has happened, this wasn't some magic trick or practical joke of yours, was it?
He asked, semi-jokingly. I was quick on my feet with the response. If it was, what did I do with the bear? Grainy nodded. I presume he hadn't thought of that. Maybe I'm the Evade Elan tea, I added. He gave me a playful wink, and he started on his way to Prospector's Rest. I resumed my resting upon the railing, and in my quiet contemplation, I failed to notice an old man sidle up to my left. He stood there, quietly, looking out over the cove with me. I was aware of his presence, and gave him a quick glance. It was a new situation to become awkward. I wondered why he failed to choose another location to cove gaze. For the longest time, not a word was uttered between us. Eventually, he broke the silence.
I would advise it wise to not claim to be the most sought-after criminal in the whole of Sinsay, let alone Cape Dominusa.
His face turned to look at mine. He was ancient, with a cataract in his left eye. I was taken aback by his comment. I didn't know who he was, and where he had been listening from. Oh no, I replied in a fast but friendly way. I was just joking with my friend. I don't even believe she exists, to be honest. He was silent for a short time.
Why didn't you say they? Have you met her personally?
He asked, quite interrogatively. His clear eye was staring straight into my clear pair, demanding answers. I wasn't sure who he was. I wondered if he was the law or a bounty hunter out for her. I haven't, I stammered. The old man produced a bemused, slightly disgusted smirk and began to walk around to my right.
Well, it's a fortunate thing, my dear, that there hasn't been someone lurking around to hear your conversation with your neighbour since when you both hugged at his door.
That feeling I had, I fleetingly thought. His demeanour of bullying was not something I was going to take, no matter who he was. Have you been spying on me? I outright asked.
Oh, not at all. I'm merely a passing traveller, named Dave.
What I discuss with my friends is of no concern to my strangers, Dave, I said, while staring deep into his clear eye. The old codger raised his eyebrows and nodded his head with a wry smile. I stayed fast in my defensive stance, giving him the message that he would get nowhere with questioning. He turned around and began to walk away, and I returned to the railing. Inwardly, I was a little shaken, and still, also so confused.
Did I place you on the side of the bed you sleep?
Asked the old man. His words produced a feeling in me, as though some great magical trick had just been performed. I couldn't believe the deception. Great exhilaration overtook my emotions.
Do you sleep on the left, right, centre? Do you sleep?
They continued to ask as I inched closer. Is it you? I asked breathlessly.
Of course it is, you Strodder.
They said. How do I know it is you? I did have doubts about their authenticity, regardless of my hyped state. The old man looked over his left shoulder and glanced around the boardwalks to see if anyone was watching. What he did next concluded that he saw no observers. As quick as a flash, they changed into the woman that I'd seen up on the mountain, the woman who had saved my life, the evade Elanti. As quickly as she had flashed her true form, she returned back to that of the old man. The revealing of her true form, if it even was, happened faster than I had a chance to respond. When I did, it was in delighted shock, as my hand went automatically to my laughing mouth.
I'm wanted around these parts, Elpherton. Got to be in disguise.
She said. Elmfane. Terrin, I corrected, still pleasantly aghast.
That's what I said. Elfie Terrin.
I shook my head at her obvious teasing. I knew she knew how to say my bloody name properly.
Take me to a cosy inn or public house for a drink and a chat. A date?
The only place in the cove, and my second home, immediately sprang to mind. The Pauldron Maker's Inn.
We sat in a little alcove of the cosy establishment, kept warm by a central fire within the floor. There were blackened wooden beams above us, holding up a thatched roof. The revelry and noise from the patrons completed the atmosphere. We had gotten some beers in tankards, and had been making small talk rather than deep conversation. I believe she was nervous to be in my presence. Nervous. She produced a small smile as she looked at me during a quiet moment. I was still in my disguise as an old man.
I am truly thankful for you saving my life, Evade Elanti,
she said. I nodded in acknowledgement.
Does that mean we're friends?
I asked. She looked up at the beams and produced a small, playful laugh.
Well, for me, I've only known you for a few hours. I'd say to tell you. But, yeah?
I found her fumbling and stammering cute.
I've got to ask, though, why did you bring me back to my house today? Days have passed since...
Another question from her I was not expecting. She shouldn't be asking these types of questions, my brain shouted at me, as I inquisitively looked at her.
Your teleporting took several days to complete. I did not expect that to be the case, and at this point I'm not sure why it took so long. All teleporting I perform is usually instantaneous. I wholeheartedly apologise for the delay.
I explained to her. I could see that she was truly and deeply trying to understand my words.
Well, where was I whilst I was teleporting?
And if we are friends?
I interjected to stop her inquiry.
Then you can call me by my name. Pris Parks.
Pris Parks. The powers you have, I've never heard of, nor seen before. You seem to be more powerful than a mage or warlock. You have the powers of a supreme being,
she said quietly, so as not to arouse eavesdropping. I nodded and became rather flattered and cocky.
Yes, I suppose I do.
I took a drink from my tankard, staring at the inn's revelry.
How do you conjure your powers? With potions or spells or...
She should not be asking these questions. My brain screamed at me once more. I could feel distraction creeping in. I took a deep breath and prepared myself to answer as much as I could without freaking the poor girl out.
A power of mine is time travel. I saw you die many times on the mountain, being mauled by that bear. Out of what was initially boredom, I challenged myself to slay the bear before it slayed you. I tried many times before I gave up and cheated. That's what you witnessed.
She stared at me in silence before glazing over slightly.
You saved my life because you were bored?
She asked, rather disheartened.
As I said initially, yes, but...
Are you human?
She interjected.
Yes, but in saving you, talking to you, I've discovered that you are interesting. You are different to every other person in this inn, in this world.
She didn't understand. She became purely confounded.
I'm sorry?
You ask questions that you shouldn't be able to think to ask.
The silence continued, as she also continued to stare, trying to understand.
Like what?
I leaned into her space.
Like, what did I mean by it kept killing you? Do I conjure my powers with potions or spells?
I'm a curious person, that's all.
She replied, rather adamantly. I leaned back away from her and into the wooden bench to ease the tension that I'd unintentionally created.
How long does it seem that it has been winter?
I asked.
Far too long.
I leaned in once more to her and spoke in a softer, quieter tone.
And if you could ask me a question, right now, anything you wanted, what would you ask?
She also leaned in and got close to my disguised, wrinkly face. I knew exactly what she was going to ask, as did she.
Why? Do you have powers?
She's special, rang in my brain. I understood what I was dealing with. I sighed and abruptly got up from the bench, maybe a little too lively for the old man I was portraying. Elmfane remained seated, full of confusion. I could understand why, though. I must have seemed like a complete freak to her.
Where are you going?
She asked, concerned. I turned to face her and tried to explain, as coherently as I could, what she should do, as my brain was racing with thoughts about what all of it meant, thoughts about what I should do next.
Go about your life. Live as you normally would. I will return within a week. I just need some time to think.
I explained. She didn't seem to understand. I waved my hand over to the innkeeper. He didn't register what I did.
I've paid our tab, so don't worry about that.
Elmfane looked over to them and back to me. I could see that she was truly bewildered.
Did I say something wrong?
She asked with her big eyes. I inwardly sighed and gave her a smile.
Take care of yourself, Elpherton. I will return.
As I left, she sat in the alcove, wondering what she'd done to prompt me to leave so urgently. I couldn't tell her. In light of what I had sussed, however, it was my plan to keep her temporarily in the dark.
Wednesday, and I was back to prospecting and exploring for Sreeswyn. The guys listened to my story that Graney, on his trip to Prospector's Rest the previous day, had fabricated for me. He told people that yes, I indeed had to defend myself against an aggressive mountain bear, and giving it the slip, I scaled down the mountain, outran it, and made my way back home to recuperate. Beforehand, he told me the spectacular work of fiction that he had relayed to the group. I had no choice but to confirm it. Something told me, though, that the heroic anecdote wasn't bought by everyone. I was placed on the team that was to inspect Point A on the map. It was just as inhospitable and impassable as Point B had been. Actually, it may have been even worse. We struggled through the waist-deep snow and ferocious blizzard. In the area where we were, I could surely see no passage through into Maythane. Priss's suggestion of telling the prospectors not to even bother rang in my ears with each step. I blew my signal horn to get the party's attention and performed a throat-slash gesture, suggesting we should turn back. The only man and leader of the team, seeing and hearing me through the wind and flurry, shook his head and, quite angrily, pointed up the mountain. I reluctantly joined in the effort to push forward, even though I knew it was futile. As I moved forward, I experienced a sensation similar to that of when I was compelled to look to the foot of my home's door the day before. I got a real sense again that someone or something was standing nearby, close to me. Yet, when I looked upon the patch of snow that felt the strongest, it again, like the foot of my door, was empty. Our Maythane-reaching efforts predictably garnered no progress, and after a few more hours of no luck, we turned back. All of us, close to frozen, called it a day. Days later at the weekend, I made a trip to the eastern town of Longshore to browse the marketplace. Finely crafted and locally made trinkets, items and wares were available for purchase. I stopped at a stall deep within the market, where I saw a pretty silver ornate bracelet adorned with a green emerald in its middle, locked in place with delicate work. Its price suggested to me that it wasn't actual silver, but it still caught my eye, so I purchased it. As I waited for the trader to wrap the item in cloth, I again looked to an empty spot, several feet to my left. Next to a fruit stall, I had the familiar feeling of being watched by an invisible entity. I hoped that if I was indeed being observed, then it was by Priss. She still hadn't shown up. More days passed, and it was Wednesday. I decided to stay home, as the weather was lashing it down. Fierce, ice-cold rain at the cove. Who could even begin to know what condition Maythane Ridge was in? I kept warm by sitting on my purple woven rug upon the orangey stony floor by my lit fireplace. I read a book and warmed my bare feet in the aura of the heat. The sound of the cracking kindling was blending with the sound of the rain droplets that hit my window panes and sills. Yet again, I had the familiar feeling of being watched. I had had it all day. I was drawn to the foot of my stairs. With all of my willpower, I tried to ignore the feeling. I tried to be fully engaged with my book. It was hopeless, though. My willpower isn't the best. The urge to investigate was gnawing at me and severely overpowering my concentration. I sat my book down and made my way over to the stairs with the feeling still lingering. As I got closer, the position of where I was drawn to seemed to move up the stairs as if a person was walking them. It made me stop for a moment as I tried to gauge the feeling. I too made my way up the creaky wooden stairs, truly believing I was in pursuit of an invisible entity. As I got to the top, the feeling went left towards my bedroom. There was no doubting its position. I followed it, walking down the short corridor that was above my living space. The only door visible was to my bedroom, the only room at the end of the corridor. As I passed the threshold of the doorframe, I stared into my sparsely furnished room. Right in the furthest corner was where the invisible entity rested. I was sensing such a strong feeling that someone was standing in the corner. I also had a pretty strong sense of who it was. "You've been gone for more than a week," I said softly, to seemingly thin air, as the rain patted the roof above. I waited for a moment, for her to appear in front of my eyes. She didn't. Alas, I eventually realised that maybe it was myself who was producing these feelings of being observed, and that I was in fact chasing nothing. I left the bedroom and proceeded to go back to my reading and warmth by the fireplace.
Elmvane,
Came a soft and familiar voice behind me. I turned around as quick as a whippet to see her standing in and holding on to my bedroom's doorframe, cautiously keeping her distance.
I didn't want to scare you by just appearing.
Before Pris could complete her words, I ran up to her and gave her a most longing hug. She held my head in her hands and our foreheads met. A strange and curious connection had developed between us. I had truly missed her. "You have been gone for more than a week," I said breathlessly, eyes closed and slightly angry.
I know,
she replied. We were still connected in an embrace, appreciating each other's presence, and we stood for a while as such. "Have you been spying on me this whole time?" I asked her.
I needed to see how you lived your life.
"Okay, that's not creepy," she laughed, and I followed. She placed her hands softly on my cheeks and moved some unsecured hair out of my face to get my open-eyed attention.
I will explain everything to you,
she declared, and I believed that she truly meant to do so.
Part 3.
I sat with Elmvane in front of her fire. She was to the left and I was to the right. She was waiting for the explanation that I was still to give. I thought long and hard about how to present the truth again, without freaking her completely out, about the reality of her and her world. I and many others like me, supreme beings, are responsible for the creation and continual creation of this world. She continued to stare at me, undeterred by the way in which I had referred to myself. Against the knowledge of the others, I took a small piece of Sensei. This piece, Cape Dominusa. This world you live in is my piece. My aim was to make my world greater and more liberating than the others had made the whole of their Sensei. And when I had finished, I thought I could show them my work. Then, if they chose to, they could make the whole of Sensei the same as my little piece, greater and more liberating. I leaned in to make sure Elmvane truly understood the following words that I was to say to her. But what I didn't anticipate was the amazing discovery of you. You are different to everyone else. You know, you understand, you comprehend. Nobody in this world has asked me the questions you have. Whether you view those questions as relevant, vital, or neither, they do certainly tell me that you are unique. It makes you the most vital being of my world. You want to know about yourself, myself. You want to know about the true reality of this world. And that is why you are the vital being. I could tell from her expression she was none the wiser, but if I told her the complete truth, she wouldn't even begin to understand before freaking out. Or maybe she would have.
Because I ask questions, I'm important?
She asked. Because you are sentient, you are present, you know how to think. Like the rest of the people in this world, you shouldn't be able to. You are alive, and I didn't anticipate that before I saved you, but I'm damn glad I did now. She hesitated before speaking.
If you say I'm the only being who knows in this world, you're wrong. I don't even know what in the world you're trying to convey to me.
I gave her a small smile. I hoped that with continued connection with her, she someday would be clearer about the truth. This is why I needed to think for a while. What do I do next? I thought. What do I do to help you? A silence between us was interrupted by a knock at her front door. I looked through its physical makeup and saw who it was on the other side, getting soaked, waiting somewhat impatiently. Their leg jolted out of anticipation and the cold. It's your neighbour, I told Elmfane with a smirk.
Oh,
She said as she stood up looking somewhat perturbed. I could see that she was worried about her neighbour's knowledge of me, since their talk on the West Walk, over a week ago. I held her hand as she stood from me. It's okay that he knows, you know. The Evadelante. He doesn't know what I look like, though, right? Elmfane shook her head and looked to the door, as another knock woodenly rang out.
I'll tell him to come back later.
You really don't have to, Elfie, I reassured her. She smiled and made her way to the door. The sound of the lashing rain became more prominent as she opened it. Looking through the matter of the door, I saw that he smiled wide and jolted his head up at her reveal.
Hey, Granny, this is really not an opportune time right now. I've got company.
It's okay.
I said loudly to her.
Invite him in out of the rain.
Elmfane turned to face me and smiled in joviality at my appearance. Graney, the neighbour, stuck his head round the door to see me. I had once again disguised myself as the old man.
Hello, sir. I'm Elmfane's friend, Graney.
I stood, pretending to be somewhat suffering from aching joints and typical old age ailments.
Pleased to meet you, chap. I'm Dave.
I replied with a smile. He stared at me smiling, probably wondering who I was to Elmfane.
I won't intrude.
He finally said.
I was just wondering if you wanted to go down the pauldron for a couple.
Elmfane nodded after thinking for a moment.
Sure. Give me an hour and I'll be down.
Her friend nodded, somewhat awkwardly.
Of course. Nice to meet you, Dave. Sir.
He said, as he looked to me with his hand in the air for farewell.
Likewise.
Go and get dry and I'll see you later.
Elmfane said, as she closed the door hurriedly on her friend that nodded to her. She turned around back to me and smiled. I had returned my body's appearance back to the form that she was familiar with. Why are you hanging around with an old man for? I jokingly said. She giggled and playfully pushed me over as she rejoined me by the fire. You're drinking buddies then? I asked.
Yeah, we're friends.
More than friends? She shook her head at the suggestion.
It's complicated. I know he likes me.
But you don't like him? Looking at me somewhat sorry for herself, like she wished she could like him, she shook her head. Does he annoy you? I inquired.
Yeah, well, sometimes. But that's Graney. I've known him for years.
I leaned forward and mockingly tried to sound like the ruthless vigilante that my preceding reputation had portrayed me to be. I can make him disappear if you want.
Whoa!
Elmfane was shocked. She convulsed at the suggestion and her mouth shot open wide.
Oh no, I don't want that. Are you serious?
I'm only pulling your leg, you nutter, I interrupted whilst cracking up. Elmfane shook her head and resumed looking at the glowing embers and tall flames of her fire. Can I come tonight? I asked softly. She looked at me, somewhat concerned.
In disguise or?
Yeah, as old man Dave. Come and meet your friend.
Sure, you're welcome to.
She said with a smile. However, I added, you've got to introduce me to him as the Evadelante. Elmfane narrowed her eyes to me and twirled her head.
Do you think that's wise?
I want to gauge the reaction of a non-sentient, just in comparison to you. She looked back into the fire, unsure of what to say. She saw that I was waiting for a response. All I got, though, was another giggle from her when she caught sight of my staring.
I had kept to my word and met Granny at the Pauldron Maker's Inn. We sat in the same alcove that I and Pris did on our first date. With drinks on the table, we had little to say to each other. I had a feeling that he was pondering who Old Man Dave was in my house. The silence between us, bar the usual inn's revelry, was getting awkward, so I decided to break it. You know that old man that was at my house earlier?
Yeah?
He's coming down later. That okay?
Sure. Who is he to you?
Before arriving, I had thought of what to say to him, in case he asked me such a question. I decided that if Pris wanted to tell him the truth about herself, then it would be of her own volition. He's an old family friend who's visiting for a while, maybe looking to move here. I've known him since I was young.
Oh, okay,
he replied. What popped into my mind at that moment, that I didn't take into account, was Granny and I had had many conversations in the past, and I'd never mentioned old family friend Dave to him before. Obviously. Anyhow, Dave says he wanted to meet you. My attempt to keep the conversation alight was cut short, as I was shocked to see Pris entering the inn undisguised. She looked despondent and paired her eye contact with me, with a sad smile. I could immediately tell that something was wrong. I sat in confusion at the situation as Pris made her way closer and closer to the table. Granny noticed her presence as she stopped shy of the vacant wooden chair opposite us. A small stare manifested, and in my dumbfounded state, Granny queried her.
Greetings. Can we
I'm
help?
Priscilla Parks, Elmfane's friend,
she said, whilst sitting down with precision and haste. She looked seriously pained as she maintained an unbroken stare into Granny's greys. He himself looked at me for answers.
Do you know this person?
He asked. Being as Pris had already given him my name, I couldn't say anything else. Yes. This is Pris Parks.
You probably know me as the Evadolante,
Pris said, immediately after I had finished my words. Granny's jaw dropped. He looked overjoyed. He started to tremble with a starstruck-like adrenaline rush.
You're the Evadolante? My gracious, you...
He was speaking far too loudly, so I tapped his arm and gestured for him to keep his voice way down. He did not.
You saved Elmfane's life. She has talked about you in such high regard.
He was all over the place with glee. He frantically looked to me, back to her, again to me, and back.
Thank you so much for...
As our eyes were both momentarily off Pris, she had manifested before her a tankard of beer. She brought it up to her lips to drink. Her mood and emotion remained unchanged as she did so. I was still concerned with her state, as Granny continued to stare in awe.
Did you make that beer appear out of nowhere? That's amazing.
Granny continued with the same energy, though now he was only semi-shouting. Pris put her beer down and pierced her eyes into Granny's essence. I could see that there was real, and to me at the time, unwarranted hatred behind them. I could sense Granny was becoming uncomfortable. Is everything all right, Pris? I asked her. Her eyes fell upon me, and instantly I saw that the hatred in them was replaced with sadness. She looked down at her beer and took a deep breath.
No, everything's not all right,
she mumbled to herself. What followed was some more silence from her as she looked down at her beer. Her hand gently fumbled with the silver-decorated handle of the tankard. I could sense Granny inching closer to me, with his growing uncomfortableness. Suddenly, her head flung up. She was clearly drained and tired.
Granny? Is it Granny?
It's Granny. Granny,
he replied with nervousness. Pris nodded with a fake smile.
Do you like Elmfane?
She asked. Granny turned to me and nervously laughed. I joined him, and as we both looked back at Pris, I saw that her fake smile hadn't disappeared.
Well, she's a friend. I like her. Yes, she's my friend,
Granny replied rather enthusiastically.
Do you love her?
Pris fired back. Granny looked back to me, and I could tell that his nervousness was suddenly tarnished with slight fear. The second nervous laugh he mustered wasn't as strong as his first. I myself was genuinely concerned about the change I saw in Pris.
Well, it depends on what you mean by love. I mean, I love her in a non-romantic way.
Do you have a crush on Elmfane?
Rapid-fired Pris in response to Granny's slight rambling. I had to intervene. Pris, what's going on?
I'm asking your friend some questions, that's what's going on.
She responded to me dryly. whilst her eyes were fixated on Graney.
Do you have a crush on Elfane?
Graney didn't know what to do. He wanted to escape that moment. I wish I let him.
As I said, I like her.
He was rather sheepish.
Really?
Pris responded, before leaning in across the table to get close to his face.
You've heard stories about me.
Yes?
You're aware of my abilities, my supposed powers?
Yes?
You're a filthy scumbag, Graney Horsey.
I had to stop the apparent madness that had infested Pris's mind. I leaned in, putting my hand up to her. Pris, that's enough. What has he done to offend you?
I'm sorry?
Graney said at the same time, as I tried to calm her down. She leaned in even further, making sure he got her message for him, loud and clear.
You are a filthy, wretched scumbag.
After which, she settled back into her chair, while still maintaining intense eye contact.
A life.
I believe I heard her quietly say. After what seemed like an age, unsure of how to respond, all Graney could do was burst out laughing. He threw his hands up in the air and leaned back into the wooden bench on which we sat.
I'm sorry, but I'm just at a loss for words with what is being exchanged between us. I mean, we haven't met before, have we?
He asked as he folded his arms. He became somewhat confident in his opposition to the mad woman opposite him.
Have we met before?
Pris queried.
I broke your scummy, twig-like neck.
Pris, can we talk? I asked her gently, trying to get through to her. My intervention, and also my hand on hers, broke her stare towards Graney. She looked at me with a deluge of sadness within her. Although there were no tears, it was as though invisible streams were seemingly starting to flow down her cheeks. She gave me a slight smile, accompanied with an emotional inhale through her nose. She eventually leaned back into her wooden chair and closed her eyes. I was the most confused that I had been. Since I first met her, all of her words of how sentient I was were nothing in comparison to the way she was acting. I looked back at Graney. He was gone. I looked back to Pris. Her eyes were still fixed closed. Involuntarily, a nervous giggle left my mouth. Pris's eyes opened up as I looked back to my still empty left. Any feelings of some invisible entity sitting next to me were absent. Graney was truly gone. Did you make him disappear? I asked with a strange giggly emotion, due to what I believe was shock. Pris said not a word. She got up from her seat and quite hastily headed for the door of the establishment, the same way she had done previously, on our first date. Pris? She shouldered the door open boisterously, as her pace turned to that of a half-run. Other patrons in the pauldron makers started to notice the commotion. Pris! I yelled, darting up from the bench and giving chase. What have you done? Bring him back.
Outside with Elfane pursuing me, I tried to fully flee, but couldn't. I had a tremendous feeling of not being able to leave her. I wanted to make everything right. In the cold air, I breathed heavily, emotionally wrought. I wiped away tears that only I knew were present. Elfane had caught up due to my involuntary stalling.
Pris, what has happened to you? Bring my friend back right now.
I had such shame. I couldn't speak or face her.
Pris, speak to me.
It took an extreme amount of effort to turn my body around to her. With the momentum, I went to hold her arms. It's for the best, I tried to explain. She pushed my embrace away with great force and took steps back.
Do not touch me! Bring Graney back, this moment. What have you done?
She railed, with huge floods in her eyes. Composing myself was out of the question. I have lived a future that now, thankfully, does not exist. So please believe me when I say this is for the best. There were no words to explain the ferocity of hatred that Elfane had found for me.
Bring him back! Bring him back right now!
She demanded via screams, pointing to the ground. You don't want to know what he does.
Bring him back! You do not decide the fate of people.
I have to live with the memories, I retorted. The words I said seemed to hit something within her, on some level. However, it wasn't enough.
I demand that you bring him back,
she said once more, trying to be more composed. I knew I could. I knew I wouldn't. I can't. He's gone. It's for the best. She stood, hopelessly. Please, please believe me when I say that, I added. I went to walk away.
He was my friend.
Stopped in my tracks. My seemingly absent tears didn't let up. I left her and walked. The walk turned into a run. The run into a bolt. The sobbing voice in the distance from the girl rang in my ears.
Return with him!
I continued to sprint.
If he was so bad for me, change things for the better. Don't leave me again. Pris!
When I returned back to my world, the day had grown dark. Sleep and rest was what I needed. I realised that I had been in Sinsei for 17 of the past 24. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Now my tears were visible. The following day, which was 3.5 hours away, would bring with it challenges and tasks that required my focused attention. My second job. Before retiring for the night, however, I made sure that, I guess what the people of Sinsei would call, the magical and mechanical contraption was inactive. The contraption that held and brought her world to life. When all my errands and work were done in 20 or so hours, I would return to Sinsei and return back to my Alfie. I pondered about maybe loading an even earlier save file and doing something else differently to change the timeline. If I did so, at least all of her bad memories and thoughts of me would be erased. But at the same time, if I did do, more of my life with her too would also go. The following day and the long of the imminent night would surely give me the time to plan, think, and make everything right between me and the girl from Sinsei.
The Girl from Sinsei by Remy Kogan was written by Dan Harrison King. The voices of Elm Fane Terrin, Mr. Shriswan and Grainy Horsey were provided by 11 Labs, generative AI text-to-speech and voice cloning. Also featured was the cloned voice of Adam King as Old Man Pris. Recordings and the majority of sound effects and ambient soundscapes were provided by Dan Harrison King and Marilyn King. Royalty-free sources were also sparsely featured in this audiobook. Special thanks to Leicester Guild Hall, Camden Road, Foss Meadows Country Park, Thornton Reservoir and the Corn Exchange for facilitating the recording of said sound effects and ambient soundscapes. Music featured was Lute for Sinsei by Dan Harrison King, available on Spotify and all other major streaming services. This audiobook is also available as an ebook on Amazon.com. Thank you so much for listening.
This audiobook is copyright of Dan Harrison King. It may not be distributed without permission and all that other legal stuff. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification.